Welcome to the Gentlewoman Boss podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Horlbogen. I'm on a mission to foster civility, respect, and integrity in the boardroom and beyond, and I invite you to join me on my quest. Welcome to the next episode of the Gentlewoman Boss podcast. My guest today is Lisa Bowman, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about her background. Lisa is a survivor of workplace sexual harassment who shows women how to find their courage to stand up and speak out. After 4 years of exceeding expectations in her role, Lisa was terminated from her role as the Global Chief Marketing Officer of United Way Worldwide in January of 2020 in retaliation for reporting sexual harassment of herself and others by a peer on the executive team. As a female leader, Lisa felt that to stay silent was to be complicit in condoning this and providing a path forward for this behavior to continue. She went public with her story via HuffPost in November of 2020, fueling significant media coverage that subsequently led to the resignation of United Way's longstanding CEO on February 9, 2021. By raising her voice, Lisa opened the door for others to follow, sharing their similar experiences during their tenure at the world's largest nonprofit. She has become one of the latest public faces of Me Too. Lisa has become a fierce and vocal advocate, speaking about her experience to help others find their voice as well and end this systemic issue so that all women have access to safe, fair, and dignified workplaces. So I am absolutely honored to have you here today, Lisa. Thank you so much for coming on my show.
Oh, Michelle, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. And I am absolutely looking forward to our conversation.
Great. So obviously the intro explained, gave some background of your situation. And I know that you did go public with your story, your experience of harassment and retaliation at the United Way. Why did you choose to do so?
You know, like my bio says, I really felt that as a senior leader, and the senior most female that this was happening to within my work environment, it was my responsibility to raise awareness of it. For me to stay silent really was the same thing as being complicit in it. If I was quiet about it, it would be swept under the rug and allowed to continue. And I just couldn't in good conscience do that. Several of the women that were harassed were more junior than myself, were women of color. I knew they were not going to stand up against a white male C-suite executive. And that was obligation on my part too. I needed to raise awareness of what was happening.
That's really incredible and very, very brave of you. I know we spoke off camera about the experience and the repercussions of doing so. It really is it's a selfless act for a cause that, as you know, I advocate strongly for as well. Now, I noticed that, Lisa, both the COO and the board chair of United Way are women, and they're also women of color. What support, how did that play out with you, coming forward to try to speak out for these targets?
Yeah, that's a great question because there's so much talk about women supporting or not supporting other women in the workplace. So let me address those two separately. You're right, both the board chair and the former COO are both women of color. When I notified the board chair of what was happening, which I did in October of 2020 via a letter that went to both full boards of United Way, I received back a response that told me that they would look into it, and that was it. They never gave me an opportunity to speak to them. They never asked for my side of the story. They conducted a full-on investigation without ever speaking with me or any of the other women, because there were multiple women. In addition to myself, there were 2 other women that had filed EEOC charges within the past year, and subsequently more than 20 former female employees that came forward with a written letter to the board stating that the behavior of myself and the others that came forward was not unique. They had all either witnessed or experienced this during their time at United Way and put together a very comprehensive list of suggestions for the board and offered to speak to the board about their experiences to give the board some context. And the board completely dismissed them. They responded with a letter that did not address anything in the letter, but talked about the things they were doing to support women in the workplace during this challenging time, like offering flexible work hours. So I got literally zero support from either of the boards. And there are two. Like you said, the global board chair is a female and a female of color.
Mhm.
The head of the US board was actually male, and he has now stepped in as the interim CEO. Regarding the COO, absolutely complicit in not taking any action or giving me any protection. What's really interesting is that United Way had several layoffs and offered a voluntary separation package to try and manage through some financial issues. And she announced at the end of February that she was taking the voluntary separation package. And so obviously left with compensation because it was a voluntary set package, and then popped up literally just 2 weeks later as a very senior HR person for a major restaurant brand, which really made me think about the fact that the hiring process is somewhat flawed, right? You do a background check on people,
Understood.
but they clearly didn't Google, because this is somebody that, although the press release that they put out talks about the fabulous culture that she created across 1,800 United Ways, what they need to understand is that during her tenure, and she was actually chief culture officer who became chief operating officer, but according to their own investigation, there were major gaps in culture. She was responsible for that. And during her tenure, there were 3 EEOC charges filed for this behavior within a 1-year period. So none of that comes up. And now they've hired this person who they think is an HR superstar, but was responsible for leaving this place in a mess and clearly jumped ship when the going got tough, because you don't land a senior role like that 2 weeks after announcing that you're taking a voluntary set package that had clearly been in the works.
That's not actually surprising to hear, right? Lisa, we've
Nope.
talked at length, and that's part of our work of raising awareness about accountability, right? With the boards of directors and accountability for protecting particularly senior people in organizations who just sort of, they get to walk out with their sweet package and life, is great for them. And they either retire early and they retire wealthy, or they, like this person, move on and get another senior role. I'm sure being very well compensated for. There's a lot of things wrong with how things are handled. And what I find shocking is, I worked in the nonprofit sector as well, but it was a very historical nonprofit in the area, but nothing compared to the range and scope of United Way. So for an organization with that much public, like such a public arena in the news, so touching every corner of the earth, literally, to have that kind of response to what you brought to the board, that's shocking. Because did they think it wouldn't come out? Did they think, it's almost like here it is, your story's out there for the world, which means it's out there for United Way's reputation. So it's really a management crisis to me.
I would agree. I think that from an accountability perspective, the board needs to remember that their overall responsibility is to provide governance and help with oversight and strategic vision for the organization, not to protect the CEO. And I believe that I was very kind, because I did have my attorney sort of fire a warning shot before I went to the media. She did inform, out of courtesy, their attorney, that I was in fact speaking to the media. And whether they just didn't think that I would do it or didn't anticipate this kind of coverage, I don't know. What I did hear is that internally from former coworkers after the first article broke. And to your point, there was very significant coverage. What I had been told is that the CEO completely dismissed the coverage and said, "Oh, it's just one article. Don't worry, it's going to blow over." And clearly it didn't. Because there was a story there. And the two publications that brought forth the bulk of the story, the HuffPost and Emily Peck. Emily is a known reporter in this area. This is what she does. And so she's very, very credible. And then Yelena Genova at Business Insider, another credible publication. These two women are investigative reporters. So they checked the facts. They did their diligence. They had no allegiance to me.
Right.
They saw a story that needed to be told, and they stepped forward to tell it with fact in hand.
Not fake news.
Not fake news, right?
I applaud. I've become a big fan of many journalists, Gretchen Carlson included. She's done amazing work raising awareness. Thank goodness for people like that are willing to, like you say, do their due diligence, dig into the story and put it out there. It's not, and I sometimes, you can probably relate to this, even after what they've done to us, speaking out about it still almost feels a little bit like a betrayal, because we were that not a betrayal, just sort of like, I guess that's the only word I can think of right now, but because we were that devoted and dedicated to our work and to our job, right, and to the cause and the mission of the nonprofit. But it's not a betrayal. It's actually a brave act to protect those nonprofits, because if these things aren't addressed, we've seen over the past year how many businesses close. It's like no one is above and beyond being, getting taken down at this point. Financially, like you said, there already were struggles in the organization financially. They were making cuts. They were trying to. So in this sort of spotlight, it can have ramifications. But that's the only way things will change. If no one knows, right? How will things change?
Right. And so, to that point too, and you mentioned Gretchen, and honestly, I owe Gretchen a huge debt of gratitude. She and I met through a mutual friend right after this happened, and she was so gracious in terms of navigating and guiding and giving me support. But to your point, if you don't speak out, then there's no visibility of this, and it continues to perpetuate in the workplace. And I know if Gretchen were sitting here with us, she would talk about this too, but arbitration and NDAs are the biggest tool of suppression that companies use to keep people quiet. And many of the other women that came forward at United Way, there's 20 plus that wrote the letter to the board. Many of them either didn't speak out because they had NDAs, or to your earlier point, they were so loyal to the mission and didn't want to hurt the organization that while they were there, they tolerated this behavior and then left, signing an NDA as part of their exit package, and never spoke about it again. And I had women that had worked at United Way that reached out to me that said, I wish I would have talked about this. I wish I would have done this. Maybe it wouldn't have happened to you if I would have spoken up earlier. And for me, back to your original question, part of it was that if I didn't speak up, there's a history of this behavior there. This was going to continue. There was going to be another woman that was subjected to this. And, I almost said another victim. And I don't like to use the word victim, because I think when you're in a situation like this, you have two choices. And you can be a victim, or you can choose to be a survivor. And for me, I chose the latter. I was not going to let somebody victimize me. It's not the first time that this has happened in the workplace to me, or probably to you or any of the other women, right? You can go on LinkedIn, you can go on social, and you see the stories of how people have navigated their careers. And this is just another instance of that. But this was the final straw for me. Enough was enough, and I wasn't going to take it anymore.
Yeah. And I'd like to revisit to your point about how you, excuse me, Emily agreed to, take your story and tell it so well and do her work. You mentioned when we spoke previously, a reaction that you received regarding your story from other very well-known news outlets, questioning not the validity, but the seriousness of your experience. Do you want to share that?
Yeah, I will. I'm not going to name who it was, but when I started talking with the media, there was a particular very national newspaper, if you will, and in sharing my story with the reporter, one of the things that she said to me was, she said, "It doesn't sound like you were sexually assaulted. Am I correct in that?" And I said, "That's correct. I was not assaulted." And she said, "Well, I really don't see where there's a story here."
Mm.
And I was so taken aback that she said that, that I just simply said to her, and I'm going to apologize for the language, but I said, "I'm really sorry that I wasn't assaulted in my office after hours to give you a story to talk about. Thank you for your time." And my language may have been a little more colorful than that, but I was shocked. I mean, I just could not believe that, again, as a female, that she felt that what I had endured wasn't worthy of talking about because I was not physically assaulted. And that just made me realize that people tend to marginalize it. Oh, it's just conversation. It's just that. Andrew Cuomo, right? We've got all of this going on in the news. Well, I didn't mean to be offensive. You don't touch somebody in the workplace. You don't touch somebody without their permission. And there are certain things that you don't say. And I do recognize that with all of this going on, we're swinging really far towards one side of the spectrum where you almost can't say anything anymore to people. But if you look at the statistics about how many women have been harassed in the workplace, it's like at some point I want to stand up and just say to these men, "Hey guys, we are here to do a job. I am not here to fulfill whatever messed up vision you've got or power trip you're on. I'm here to do a job, and therefore I want to be recognized for the contributions I bring in my work, not the way my clothes are fitting me today or how my hair looks."
Yeah. It's so, that marginalization, it's so true because, and I think, coming on the other side of it, by that reporter minimizing your experience, that's like psychological abuse. That is, you don't get to judge other people's pain or other people's experience or other people's sense of defilement, right? Whether it's verbal, just people's expressions, the way they look at you, you can't say that that's acceptable, which basically that person was doing, because there wasn't actually a physical assault. And I think that's a unique part of your story as well, in that for other women to understand that behavior is still sexual harassment, that behavior, right? Even if there's not a physical touch, contact, arm, it's still a violation of your space. And as a woman, or even as a man, I mean, we know this happens the other way too, which is another whole podcast episode, but that doesn't have to be tolerated. And
yeah, you're right. It does happen the other way too. But if you look at the definition and if you read the language under Title VII, right, it does not have to be a physical assault to qualify as sexual harassment. And your point about being judged and having somebody marginalize my experience based on their perspective, I think is a really valid one, right? Don't play judge and jury from my experience because you didn't live it. And for that reporter to say that was so unbelievably uninformed in terms of this topic that there's no way anyway I would have wanted her to cover the story. I ended up being very lucky because, like I said, Emily's got a background in doing this. She knows the stories. This is her expertise.
Yeah, and I think it also is. I'm actually conducting a survey right now. And if you go to my website, thegentlewomanboss.com, there's a link right on my landing page to take a survey about if you have, what did you wish you the tools you had, or what did you wish you knew before you experienced workplace abuse of any kind? And what's coming in right now at the highest percentage is a better understanding of the EEOC's, role in other words, what's a protected class? What is considered sexual harassment? What are my rights? Am I in a protected class? There's so little. I'm going to be honest. I didn't know any of that before I was fired. I did all my research about that after the fact. Had I known what I know now, good Lord,
Oh, yeah.
I could have added a lot more to my litigation now with what I know now. But it's feel like it falls on us as humans, us as people. We're responsible ourselves to educate ourselves, but also HR has a role in making sure their employees are educated about, and that's another whole part of it, that HR is complicit so often, and they are there to protect the organization. We talked about this previously. They're there. They want to keep their job. So they're going to do what's best for their boss and for the organization. And so many times the employees don't get the support. They don't get the information. I mean, a poster in a hallway on the way to the restroom, how many of us would stop and read that, right? To understand our rights and all that. And I wanted to go back. Speaking of the EEOC, do you want to talk a little bit about what that experience has been like for you?
I kind of joke that I've become an amateur lawyer here because it is not an easy process to navigate. It's a lengthy process. It is a costly process. Well, you can do it on your own. It's difficult to do, candidly, without an attorney. But that aside, I want to back up and address one point that I just heard you say about HR and people needing to be educated. HR is never going to educate you on your rights when you've got an issue with the company. And what was so interesting in my case is that we had tons of policies and trainings and manuals and statements and all of the stuff that you have to check the box and say, yes, we do this the right way. But if you don't follow those policies and procedures, it doesn't matter if you have them, right? You can have banker's boxes full of paper. But if you don't adhere to that, then none of it matters. I do, to your point, I wish I would have known before my termination what to do, because I certainly would have filed with the EEOC while still employed. I think my mistake was that I trusted my employer to do the right thing. And I went to them, I followed the process, right? And the process said that if you are aware of even potentially harassing behavior, you are obligated to report it to HR, and failure to do so will carry consequences up to and potentially including termination, right? So they had all of the right words there. I trusted them. I believed them. I took them at their word.
Yeah.
But had I known, honestly, I would have filed my EEOC charge before I left. So, the one piece of guidance I would give to people is, if you're in this situation, don't wait until you lose your job or your job is at risk to start doing your diligence. The minute that you feel you're at risk, start learning. There's tons of resources out there. And candidly, even before you're at risk, when you're deciding to accept a new job, you want to look at that paperwork. Absolutely. And look for things that could be a red flag. Are there arbitration clauses in there? Because those arbitration clauses are used to hide bad behavior by mandating that if there's an issue, they will arbitrate that with an arbiter of the company's choosing, and that you don't go to the EEOC. That's just a way of hiding bad behavior. So if you see that in an employment agreement or a contract, you should be thinking to yourself, why is this there? Do I really want to sign this? Because I can tell you, for me, I will never sign an employment agreement that's got that in there after this experience.
Yeah. Hindsight 2020, right? It's so true that, because I had a very similar experience. I followed the direction in the handbook. They did not, which is in my favor in my case, and it is that trust factor, because, and again, I don't think anyone ever comes forward because because I want to bring down a company. We come forward because we want to protect the reputation of the company. We want things to be fixed before they blow up out of proportion or before. So the intent is genuine, right? And when you get the kind of response we both receive from the employer, which is basically kicked out the back door, that is such a betrayal of our core, right? I know we talked about the damage that results from retaliation and wrongful termination for people that speak up is not just loss of a job or a paycheck or a salary or your how else have you, if you don't mind sharing, Lisa, what experience have you had in the ramifications of damage to you and costs to you?
Yeah, that's a great question, Michelle, because there really are two facets to that damage, right? There's the financial implications, and then there's sort of the personal or emotional implications. And for me, I loved my job at United Way. I mean, I left a 15-year career at UPS that I wasn't necessarily looking to leave, right, because I got a great opportunity to go to United Way and do what I do as a marketer for a bigger purpose, which was helping some person somewhere that I was likely never going to meet have a better tomorrow because of the work I did today or yesterday. And that was so exciting to me. And I loved my job, and my job was very enmeshed with my identity. So all of a sudden, this was the first time since I was in my early 20s that I hadn't had a job, and I've never been fired from a job. And it was like that, oh my gosh, who am I now? I don't have my job. I'm just Lisa Bowman, private citizen, which is not nearly as exciting and purposeful, if you will. So for me, I had to find ways to sort of overcome that and really lean in. I started doing a lot of consulting with purpose-driven organizations and strategic advising to really find that sense of purpose to guide me through this. But I will say it's been tough. I mean, I still have really bad days, more often than I'd like to, a year past this. And it's made it very hard for me, candidly, to be able to go look for my next role and be able to feel like I'm ready to come in sometimes and bring that capacity, because there's still this unresolved issue hanging over.
I can relate to that. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, there's that, but then on the financial side too, people think that when you lose a job, it's just that, oh, you don't have a paycheck. It is so much more than that, right? Financially, it's you don't have a paycheck. You are incurring legal fees to battle a wrongful termination. You are losing all of the other benefits that people sometimes don't even think about. I mean, I lost my job in February. I had to start over with a new deductible on my healthcare plan. I had to get on a new healthcare plan, which was way more expensive and had worse coverage than the plan that I had at United Way. As an individual, you cannot put away as much money pre-tax as you can with a corporate 401k or 503b in a nonprofit. So I lost the ability. Number one, I didn't have money coming in. I couldn't even put money away. If I had wanted to channel money from my savings account, for example, and be able to save for my retirement, I didn't have the ability to do that. You've got a very small amount as an individual that you can put away each year compared to the 26,500 that I could put away. Loss of the match. All of this impacts my retirement, right? Because I've now been financially derailed for well over a year with no savings, none of this. And then there's sort of the career, because when I joined United Way, what I specifically said to the CEO was that I spent the first 15 years of my career essentially with UPS. And I was so thrilled to be joining United Way that I was looking forward to this being chapter 2 and ending my career here, and that the next 15 years were going to be spent at United Way. So really, from my perspective, they stole a full 10 years of my career. And that's just, it's disheartening. Like everybody else, I've got expenses, and, thankfully, I was able to get unemployment and some of the extra because of the timing with the pandemic. But, had it not been for that, I really would have been in worse shape, candidly.
That's an excellent point, Lisa, because I was going to mention that not only did you have to have this horrific, betrayal and work experience, it happened during the pandemic. I mean, you said it was February, and the pandemic, I mean, I'm in Massachusetts, Boston was the hub of the breakout, thanks to that big seminar. We were in lockdown March 6, 7. We were quarantined. We were locked down. The TJ Maxx was closed. Home Goods was closed. It was crazy. So, I mean, for you to have to, in a sense, maybe a blessing, because it was okay to just stay home and do the work you need to do. But at the same time, timing was like, it's horrible to have. I mean, my heart goes out to you because it's that difficult enough to go through those bad days. And then when you add the pandemic on top of it, there's a lot.
Yeah, it was really tough. To your point, there was all of this happening and then the pandemic. And I mean, I had lined up like right at the end of February. I had already started to line up so many meetings and networking coffees and all of those things in search of my next role, just knowing, pandemic aside, right, that it was going to take time. And then boom, 2 weeks later, we're full on in the pandemic and all of that went out the window. And it has been a really horribly tough year. And I will say that with no shame, because I think we've all had a horribly tough year. There's different layers of tough, right? There are people that have lost loved ones during this past year, haven't been able to see people, have been geographically separated because of lockdowns and travel restrictions and things like that. But we each deal with it in our own way. And for me, it's been just an absolutely gut-wrenching, candidly, past year.
Yep, I can relate to that. And just listening to you talk the past 10 minutes or so, I just hope there's like a CEO or a director on a board that listens to this and understands this is a human being's life that you are just attempting or destroying or trying to destroy by this kind of behavior. There are human beings behind this, real people, right? And I think when I love when people come on and they're just so honest and candid like that, because it just helps me to see, number one, I'm not alone, but also that there's a real human behind this, right? And a story and someone that's affected on all these levels. So thank you for that, Lisa.
Oh, my pleasure. I mean, when you said that, that just like really hit me right here, because people don't realize that I am not an HR case. I am not an EEOC charge. I'm a person. And I'm a person that this organization just tossed aside like garbage because they didn't want to handle their problem and instead chose to make me the problem.
Wow, a little bit at a loss for words after that half hour with Lisa. Thank you to everyone that tuned into part 1 of my podcast episode interviewing Lisa Bowman, former global CMO of United Way Worldwide and the latest face of the Me Too movement. Although her story has been told in print, this is the first time she's spoken about it in a live interview. This will be available on YouTube for you to watch, and as well as on any podcast outlet where you like to listen to your podcast. So thanks for tuning in. Look for part 2 of the episode next week, and see you then. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Gentlewoman Boss podcast. Don't forget to download my show so you can listen whenever and wherever you'd like. And if you're enjoying the show, please take a second and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps with ratings and distribution. Thank you so much. As always, if you'd like to share your story, or if you have a question you'd like answered or on an upcoming episode of the show, you can visit my website or send me a DM on any of my social media platforms. Find and follow me at Gentlewoman Boss. If you prefer to watch podcasts rather than just listen to the audio version, my episodes are uploaded on my YouTube channel in video format as well. Click subscribe, and when new episodes drop, they'll show up in your feed. Super easy. So until next time, remember, always choose to be the gentlewoman or gentleman in the room. And I'll see you soon for the next episode of the Gentlewoman Boss Podcast.